Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
All right, gentlemen, welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. As always, I am your host, Scott McKay, at Scott McKay on Twitter, YouTube, just about everywhere except Instagram, where I'm Real Scott McKay. Today, we're going to talk about a topic, man, that is just burning a hole in the souls, the very souls of most men everywhere. It's not talked about enough. Every guy wants to talk about it. The problem is, not ironically, nobody has anybody to talk about it with. That's because what we're going to talk about today is building friendships and alliances with other men. Now, I happen to know from my research that the average number of close friends men report in the United States of America, this is the average, is zero. Zero close friends most men have. That means we've got a real problem, not only in this country, but probably in Canada, Western Europe, and who knows where else in the world, probably everywhere else. Men are becoming more isolated. Men are becoming more confused. Men are becoming alienated from their own masculinity precisely because we're not in community with other men. So where do we go from here? What do we do? Well, I've brought in a new friend of mine who is an impressive guy. You're going to love him immediately. His name is Antonio Neves. He is the author of Stop Living on Autopilot, which sounds strangely similar to Unsettled, right? And you can call him Tony. Tony, welcome to the show, man. It's a pleasure to have you on.
It is such an honor to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. You know, you and I talked at length, probably more than I've talked to any new guest before hitting record in some time, because there was plenty to talk about. Now, you are formerly with broadcast journalism. You worked for NBC. You worked for BET, other networks you told me about. You told me you were hosting shows on Nickelodeon, of all places, which sounds immensely fun. I don't know if I ever could have retired from that. I still don't understand why Steve Burns retired from Blue's Clues. You know, given the chance, I could have stayed there forever like I was freaking Captain Kangaroo probably. But you had other fish to fry. You've moved on to becoming a leader of men, a speaker at conferences worldwide. And in the midst of all the motivation you do, it seems to me from our conversations and from what I've read about you, Tony, that your passion is helping men recover to be the men they're supposed to be. And in many ways, that starts with community, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%. And this is personal for me because about 8 years ago, Scott, if you looked at the internet, the internet would have told you that I was living my best life ever. You mentioned some of those things with my speaking career, my books. I was married, beautiful wife, had the house with the white picket fence, 2 kids, etc. But it's one of those reminders, and I'm sure you know this well, is that the internet, Google, it tells a story, but it can never tell the whole story.
Ye old highlight reel.
Exactly. LinkedIn, the success and careers, et cetera. It tells a story, but it doesn't tell the whole story because behind the scenes, even though according to the internet, I was living my best life ever, behind the scenes, my life was a hot mess. My wife and I were in marital counseling, getting fired from counselors. I was struggling to connect with my newborn twins, being a product of multiple divorces growing up, didn't know what it meant to be a dad or a husband, even though business was going good. As I never knew what it meant to be an entrepreneur, so I was struggling there. And I slowly but surely, I found myself disconnecting and isolating from community, from friends. And, I gained 30 pounds of weight. I grew a big old beard to hide the weight gain, which, by the way, for your listeners, beards do not hide weight gain.
They kind of do the opposite. They make you look like Santa Claus,
Yeah, I started drinking a little bit too much in the evening. And I even developed this secret cigarette smoking habit. Again, according to the internet, living my best life ever, but behind the scenes, I was struggling. And if it wasn't for a community of men in Los Angeles where I live, where I got to connect with them on a weekly basis, I don't know what would have happened for me. It was such a shift, and it helped me to stop living on autopilot and made me lean into my community of men more than ever.
How did you find this community of men, Tony? Did you just stumble upon them? Were you invited, or did you create it, or what got you to get off a top dead center and get in this community of men?
Yeah, there's this global organization called Summit Series. It's an organization that involves artists and entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, business owners, et cetera. And I've met some guys over the years at the events, and a lot of us ended up in Los Angeles together. And again, we all were business owners or solopreneurs. And we started just meeting up weekly for hikes on Thursday mornings at 7 a.m. And there we would talk about life, we talk about business, we talk about relationships, struggles, good and bad. And that was like, the formation, if you will, of our man morning community. What I found, Scott, and it'd be fun to get your experience. I find that the conversations that you have with men at 7 a.m. over coffee or tea are very different from the conversations you have with men at 7 p.m. over beer or cocktails. Don't get me wrong, I have no problem with beer, cocktails, wine, etc. But the intentional tone of a conversation at 7 a.m., it is just different. You can't hide after a couple of drinks with loud music, distractions with the sports games and the bars, etc. And so we formed with that mission of getting together on a weekly basis to support one another, to encourage one another, to inspire and challenge one another as well. One thing I really needed at that point in my life is someone to challenge me, someone to hold me accountable. In this community, in the world nowadays, especially with social media, as you know, one thing we're so good at calling people out. Criticism. But you know what we need in our life? You need those men who are willing to call you up. Not call you out, but call you up to be the best version of yourself. And those men that can look you in the eye and tell you the truth. I think the difference and the reason why my book, Stop Living on Autopilot, has been received not just well in the United States, and I've talked about that on the Today Show. There's multiple international editions, is because I'm a firm believer, Scott, that people don't necessarily need another pat on the back. You know what folks need? You know what men need? They need someone to tell them the truth, eye to eye. And that's what happened when we would meet weekly on Thursday mornings at 7 a.m. You couldn't hide. And I think that's why this show that you have is so great, because what I hear in your show is the truth. You're not just trying to pat somebody on the back and necessarily make them better. Yeah, you're going to encourage them, but you also tell them the truth, what they need to hear.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'll tell you what, Tony, what you're talking about isn't just fascinating, which is a word I use often on this show. It's profound. I'm intrigued and I'm curious to find out even more about how this whole mindset has evolved with you. But I'll tell you straight up, you are never going to get the kind of support from other men you need from the anonymous internet. You and I were sort of bemoaning the rise of Facebook groups where men just air out all their dirty laundry about their work relationships with their boss, their dirty laundry, their lack of parenting success, their porn addictions, etc., to basically an anonymous group of guys somehow feeling this, false sense of security, even though they're in a group of 60,000 other men. It's still a large group of guys who you really don't know. And yet their trust is placed in this environment, and they get this cacophonous array of generally bad or at least wildly conflicting advice. And I'm now realizing, Tony, it's because they have nobody in real life to talk to. That's why they had to kind of go there as a last resort.
They have no one to talk to. Look, you mentioned this at the top of the episode. The shocking truth is, one, the Surgeon General, regardless of what you think about the Surgeon General, has said that there's an epidemic of loneliness that is happening right now, and it is leading to so many mental health challenges. The research shows that 1 in 7 men don't have a friend. They say that right now men are experiencing a friendship recession.
Well, hold on. It's like I said at the top of the show. I've seen research that shows the average number of close friends men have is 0.
And I would believe it. I would believe that. And to your point, so unfortunately, what we're doing is we go to the internet, we go to these groups, and we type things with our fingers or on the keyboard, and it makes us feel like we did something. It's kind of like when you buy a self-help book, but you never read it. You feel like you did something. It's like when you sign up for a great course that can change your life, but you only watch module 1. You don't get through all 6 modules. It makes you feel like you did something. But that's why it's so critical to see people face to face, eye to eye. I want people, specifically men, to look at their calendars. It is so critical to have something on your calendar to look forward to that isn't changing, where you know you're going to meet with men. I don't care if it's a man morning group like I have every Thursday morning, if it's a church group, if it's a class that you're going to, if it's a conference. There needs to be something on your calendar where you are engaging with men. And let's be clear, it doesn't have to be, these men don't have to be your best friends. These just have to be men who have the same mission, and that mission is to get better. We've always heard the refrain about, think about, the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And I always invite people just to visualize the 5 people you spend the most time with, whether that's in person, whether that's on your phone, and ask yourself a really simple but challenging question. And that is, do they make you better? Do they make you better? And I think something else we don't talk about enough when it comes to isolation, especially in the past 3 years, Scott, is there's some things that are really hurting men. And one of those things is remote work. We don't need to get in a big, long, drawn-out conversation about the workplace right now, but remote work where young men specifically would go in and build relationships with other men and have those outlets to build, to be challenged and pushed. You are not going to get that working at a coffee shop by yourself. You're not going to get that working in your home office by yourself. And so many people have just shifted to being on cruise control and living a status quo kind of life. For the longest time, the marker of success for men has been what? The man cave. The man cave. And I feel like the man cave has destroyed so many men's lives because that comfort, that ease of being at home with the big screen TV, that fridge with cold beer, it doesn't allow you to go out and interact and to be vulnerable and to struggle and have to introduce yourself to someone new. So, there's so much going on right now as it relates to men.
Man, what happened to the neighborhood barbershop?
Oh my goodness. The neighborhood barbershop was, especially growing up like in an African-American community, that's where you would go. That's where you would go to build, and you would go to hear, and you would go to laugh. And it was just so consistent. Or that weekend basketball game that pickup game you would go to. I think something else that's important, Scott, is that one thing men we have to realize is that building great relationships, sometimes what that requires is being inconvenienced. It takes effort. It takes effort. A lot of times, I live in Los Angeles, so many people here, so much traffic. And sometimes the last thing that I want to do is drive 45 minutes to go 13 miles to meet up with my man morning group. I don't want to be inconvenienced like that. But guess what? Once I make that drive and I see those folks face to face, I'm not inconvenienced anymore. I'm so happy I made that drive. When my friend asked me on a Saturday morning, like, hey, can you come over and help me hang these cabinets in my garage? I don't want to do that. I don't want to be inconvenienced. But guess what? When you go there and an hour in to helping hang those cabinets and they share with you that they're having a really challenging time with something, you're so glad that you're there. And I think, unfortunately, many of us are unwilling in this digital age to be inconvenienced. But great friendships take effort, and they take being inconvenienced.
Man, you are so good at throwing every single conceivable element of modern blight socially on the table in broad daylight. I mean, I don't even know where to start. You've so concisely and completely expressed all of it. Man, since, we're not going to talk about COVID anymore, we don't talk about COVID. No. Everybody's sick of it, right? But just because we're sick of it doesn't mean it's not going to be relevant to bring up, and dust off every once in a while. I'll tell you what, I will go to my grave believing, Tony, that some people loved being locked down. It was like, this is freaking great. I don't have to deal with people. I don't have to be human anymore. I just type away on social media, and I get to insulate myself and all my dark secrets and all my problems from anybody else ever having to know about it. And I don't have to be inconvenienced at all. I can DoorDash my way through life nowadays. I call up a restaurant. They bring me stuff. Amazon has same-day delivery. We've talked about this a lot on this show. Everybody expects the easy button, push a button and my problems are solved. Yet, so many people complain so much. Oh my gosh, Irma Gerd, this is the worst time in history ever to live. Yeah, whatever. This is a first world problem. The safer, the cozier, the less challenged we are intellectually, physically, yes, physically, et cetera, and yes, socially, the softer we get. And then the more we still complain as if there's still something wrong. Why? Because human beings, especially men, strive for more. And when we're stagnant, we suddenly don't feel alive anymore, and we're hardwired to feel alive, aren't we, Tony?
Oh, we are hardwired to be alive. We are hardwired to do hard things. We are hardwired to make progress. A lot of people are struggling right now because, we think about, the United States and how we go about things. You have grade school, middle school, high school. Maybe for some folks, they have college. But what happens is all of a sudden you have this ongoing regular achievement checking off the boxes. Then all of a sudden it just stops when you, quote unquote, enter the real world and you check off all the boxes of things that you're supposed to do, of getting married, having a mortgage, getting a man cave, having kids, etc. But we stop striving. We stop trying to achieve big things. I like to ask myself on a regular basis. And by the way, everything I'm sharing today isn't me trying to tell folks what to do. These are things I have to regularly remind myself. But on a regular basis, I have to ask myself, one, what have you finished? Like I'm trying to finish things on a regular basis. The men that I work with, the men we talk to in Man Morning, we are talking about ongoing achievement. What have you finished, on a big scale or a large scale? Are you continuing to learn and grow on a regular basis? And a lot of men aren't doing that. And to your point, so many folks love that comfort of being inside because it allowed them, it allowed me to escape that accountability that you don't get. When you're out in the world, you get that accountability, but when you're at home isolated, you're not getting that. But I think it's something else we have to talk about that's important when it comes to men, and that's this: guilt. A lot of men feel, and how do I know this? Because I've experienced this. A lot of men feel guilty for doing anything that doesn't involve work and making money or being with their family. It's as if they only can do these two things. And it comes down to that question like, hey, what is the best use of your time? But if they're not working, if they're not making money, it's like they can't do anything else. And that's led to a lot of friction between men and women as well when it comes to guilt. And I think there are some tough conversations that need to be had between men and their wives about why it's so critical for them to connect with other men, to build, to have those things on their calendar. Otherwise, folks are going to continue to shrink. They're going to continue to struggle and no longer be that version of themselves that they want to be. And I found in my life that most times those tough conversations that we need to have with our spouse or our significant other, those conversations typically last 10 minutes or less. But we have to be willing to have that conversation. But guilt is another, big element of what's hurting men right now.
You bring up a valid point in that we can't expect the women in our lives to be our mommies. They're our spouses. They look to us for leadership as men of the house to provide and protect. They're not there to provide for us and to protect us. Yes, they are our confidants. They are our partners in life. But one thing I have noticed, and it's a little painful, Tony, is that the woman in your life will let you lead yourself into oblivion. Now, she may get fed up and she may start losing attraction for you if you lack ambition, and especially if you let your T levels drop and you start getting cranky. If you're a threat to her instead of making her feel safe, and that means physically and emotionally, as we've talked about around here all the time. But you really do need other men in your life in order to be held accountable, because that's what we as guys do. We are in the trenches together. We hunt together. We go to war together. We ride motorcycles together and we bowl together. Whatever it is we're doing, community, team, having a platoon of men around you is the secret golden ticket to being held accountable, as long as there's trust and respect between the men involved.
I agree with you 100%. It's one of those reminders that no one who has accomplished anything of significance did it alone, and neither should we. And unfortunately, especially when it comes to marriage, and the research backs this up, and the psychotherapist Esther Perel talks about this, Many times men were looking to our spouses to be our everything, to run every idea, every emotion, everything off of.
She can't be your mommy and your lover at the same time. It's one or the other.
She cannot be all of those things. That's why it's so important to have that community. Listen, I know, I love to share things with my wife, but I'll tell you right now, I don't share everything. I don't share every woe, every bad moment. There are so many ebbs and flows of emotions that I may experience over the course of the day. But one thing I do my darndest to stick to is my standards and my values. And I want to make sure I'm finding ways to be honest with her, but also finding ways to empower her and to make sure she looks at me with certain types of eyes. And having that relationship with those guys in my life allows me to not expect her to be everything. A lot of dudes, Scott, are emotionally constipated.
Love it. I love the term. I don't love the situation.
Yeah. They are holding back anger. They are holding back fear. They are holding back sadness. They are holding back joy, things they haven't been able to share because, like you said, they're isolated and staying at home or maybe not sharing with people. But when you get out with those crew of men, those allies, again, those men that encourage you, that inspire you, challenge you, push you, and hold you accountable to be the best version of yourself, you're going to be able to release that emotional constipation. Being with my household and, being a father and my wife, I recently lost my father not long ago. And, of course, we're expected to keep on moving, to keep on grooving. And I shared the sadness with my wife, of course. But it wasn't until I went on a hike with my guys where I could really share what that loss meant to me and how it hit me and what it meant to me now now me being Mr. Neves, now that my dad's gone, and what it meant now from my marriage perspective, from a father perspective. And if I didn't have the outlet of men, I would still be constipated, from that emotion. And men have these big explosions sometimes, right? And I feel like when we're emotionally constipated, it's kind of like having a can of soda and it's just shaking up nonstop. And then at some point, it's going to explode at the wrong time. And it's because we haven't been willing to have the outlet to share these things. The last point I'll make on this is far too many men wait for those life-altering events to shift their lives. They get that bad health diagnosis from a doctor. They get served divorce papers. They get a DUI. They get laid off from their job. And it's only when they experience those external life-altering situations that they decide to make a change. Something I have to remind myself, and I remind men in the Man Morning community, is that don't wait for a life-altering event to live the life that you're supposed to be living. All of us, we are that life-altering event. And sadly, we wait for that horrible thing to happen to spark change and to do things a little bit different. So if there's a call to action I have for folks today, is for you to be that life-altering event as opposed to waiting for it to happen.
I think that's beautiful, man. And two things of equal importance come to mind as you were talking. The first one is we as men really will cling to the status quo as long as we possibly can, because we get our setup just right and then we don't want to change it. So until someone moves our cheese and we hit rock bottom and have to bounce up, because that's the only way we can go from there, we don't do jack diddly about it. And that's basically the theme of my whole program called Unsettled, is we could die here if we let ourselves, instead of challenging ourselves to do more, accomplish more, be more between the two dates that are going to be on our tombstone someday. So yeah, man, you're right on the money there. The second thing is I got to call out the elephant in the room, man. You're talking about men getting frustrated, being bottled up, and having no outlet for that because they don't have a group of friends with whom to discuss those things, and then the guilt and shame over simply being imperfect as a man when it seems like we're not allowed to misstep. I mean, that's baked into masculinity is we almost have to be perfect and there's no margin for error. Well, that bottling up turns violent sometimes.
Yes.
Now, we can politicize this. We can talk about how white males are domestic terrorists. We can drive whatever narrative we want. We can say anybody who supports the Second Amendment is complicit with people who are shooting the place up. But what those shooters always have in common is exactly what you were talking about. They had nobody. They were bottled up. And then one day, boom, the lid gets unscrewed from the warm Diet Coke bottle and something extremely bad happens. Yet society is turning a blind eye to what the real consistent issue is every time this goes on. Hey, depending on where you read your news, you're going to find out that when these violent things happen, the people don't always have the same sexual orientation. They don't always vote the same way. They're not always of the same race, but what they consistently are is bottled up. And that's got to be said because it doesn't get said ever in this culture. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm glad you said that. And I think another consistent theme that shows up in situations like that is, especially when it relates to men, is a lot of those men don't have fathers in the household. That's why
exactly.
That's so critical. The family element is so important. Something else that's important that we talked about today is a lot of these men, you go back, what do they look at? They look at the digital trail, all of the communication they have online in these groups, what they share. So they're not interacting with people, with humans, with men in real life. They're isolated. And here's the truth. And this is the hard part. Fellas, vulnerability, it's not optional. You know, we have to be willing to show up and be willing to share what's really going on. Of course, you don't share that with just anyone, but I'd rather you share that with a friend or a family member than anonymously in some random chat group or other group. And, you know, my call to action, again, I have another one, is I want folks to check in on your friends. Right now, I'm sure folks who are listening, there's probably someone in their life. There is a man in their life that comes to mind that maybe I should check in on him. I haven't talked to him in a while. And two of the dangerous words, Scott, that a man can say after you say how you're doing is, I'm fine. Those are two of the dangerous words a man can say, I'm fine. And if you connect with that man in real life, not just on text, you will be able to use what I call that level 3 listening. And they say, I'm fine. And then you can pick up on all the nuances and energy, and you can say, hey, man, I hear you say I'm fine. But underneath that, am I hearing some sadness? Am I hearing some anger? Am I actually hearing some joy? And all of a sudden, you create, and then you got to be quiet, right? That's the big, you got to be quiet. And then all of a sudden, by you doing that, it's like slowly opening up a water faucet. And they start to share a little bit more. And checking in on your friends isn't a one-time thing. We have to do this on a regular basis. And that's why, you know, groups like Man Morning are so important. There are times that I go for that 7 a.m. Thursday hike with my guys, and I'll spend an hour, Scott, and guess what? I won't even say a word. For a guy who can talk a lot, me, I won't even say a word. But guess what? I still get so much out of that because I'll hear other people sharing things, and I'll realize, wow, I am not the first person to experience what I'm going through. Other folks are going through this. I'm not in this alone. So check in on your friends.
Now, still, I would say there's a meta level of vulnerability there. Because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking if I have the audacity to be vulnerable enough to check in on one of my friends and risk that he's going to tell me I'm full of it and go away, once he does reveal to me what's going on, you know where that meta level potential concern lies? Maybe that fear-based mentality is that, you know what, it's going to be my turn. I respect that you can go on a hike in the morning, Tony, with your buddies and not have to say a word. Oh, but your turn is coming. And that means you're going to be, well, compelled into that vulnerable position. And I think whether it's conscious or unconscious with a lot of guys, some of us are saying, oh, hell no, I'm not going to ask that another guy open up to me because then I'm going to have to open up to him and that's going to hurt even more.
Yes, that is 100% real. And that's where your opening, that's where your breakthrough probably is going to happen. Again, vulnerability is not optional. But again, this has to be with folks that you build that trust with over time or those intentional communities. Something else that needs to be said, Scott, and I don't think people talk about this enough, and people may be hearing this and saying, that's great, Tony. I'm glad you have a community of guys that you can do this with. I don't have that community. Well, guess what? Sometimes you have to write a check. Sometimes you have to write a check and you have to join a community. You have to attend a master class where you know that certain people are showing up who are committed to growth, who are committing to getting better. It may not be in person as you would like, but sometimes you have to write a check, because the best investment we can ever make is in ourselves. And I wish everyone had great communities around them, like I do. But guess what? I write a check every single month. I'm part of so many different communities where I show up. So I can get this type of support. I can get this type of encouragement, where I can get this type of languages and tools to get better. So I don't want folks to be afraid to also invest in themselves and their mental health, whether that's with a coaching program, whether that's with a master class, whether that's with a therapist or beyond.
Or with the Man Morning community.
That's it. Exactly.
There you go. So to kind of punctuate all this, to use your own words, you need to find a group of men who will be your allies of glory, instead of wasting your time with anyone or anything who is a thief of ambition, to use your words, which I love so much.
Yes, allies of glory, not thieves of ambition who suck up your energy, who always have drama going on, who accept the status quo. No, you need those allies in your life. Again, they're not going to call you out. They're going to call you up to be the best version of yourself. And even more, this is so pivotal right here, those people in your life that are clapping when you win. Surround yourself with men you can go to breakfast with, and those people that clap for you when you win, who aren't threatened by your success and your happiness.
Yeah, man, schadenfreude sucks. I mean, if you feel it towards other people, it's just burning a hole in your soul. Yeah.
Yes.
That goes both ways. His name is Antonio Neves, but you can call him Tony. He's the author of Stop Living on Autopilot. And what I'm going to do for you guys is I'm going to put his book right at the top of my Amazon influencer queue, which you can find at mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon. And if you are listening to this show within about a week or so of when it comes out, you will indeed find his book right there at the top. Good book. And when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Antonio, you will be magically teleported over to manmorning.com, where they will find what, Tony?
Oh, they're going to find a weekly newsletter where thousands of men show up every single week to get strategies, tools, and resources to help them upgrade the levels of their life that matter most, growth-minded men.
Man, that's fantastic. Tony Neves, man, it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, and I hope we become more than mere acquaintances. I hope we become friends, because you're a good dude.
Consider it done. Thank you so much for having me, Scott.
Right on. And gentlemen, be sure to head over to mountaintoppodcast.com. Here's the deal. The newest thing going on around here is the YouTube channel is finally getting an upgrade. 2-minute videos that will dispel a myth that has been long-standing in the world of men's dating advice. What's that myth, you say? Well, it's a different one every week, which is why you should check out mountaintoppodcast.com/YouTube and subscribe to that channel. Also, gentlemen, we have talked about master classes several times during the course of this episode. Go to mountaintoppodcast.com/masterclass and partake of any of the previous master classes, or get your ticket to the live event that's coming up in the world of X and Y communications masterclasses. You will join a group of men. It is interactive, and I leave nothing on the table with the topic about how to get better with women that we talk about each and every month. Also, of course, as always, check out our sponsors. Jocko Willink's company, Origin in Maine, has the best boots, the best jeans you will ever wear. They now have black denim jeans, and you need to get you some. TheKeyport.com, everyday carry devices that are not your grandfather's Swiss Army knife. Good stuff. Also, Hero Soap Company, brand new scents that make you smell like a man, feel like a man. My go-to is one called Cool. I feel refreshed every time I get out of the shower after using that particular, I don't know if you would call it a flavor or a scent of Hero Soap. It's called Cool. That's my favorite. All of those sponsors are there for you from mountaintoppodcast.com as well. Just click on the link for each respective one and use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10 when you do, so they know I sent you. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X and Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X and Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X and Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.